we have not more than about 10 minutes for questions or comments to the two speakers.
All right. First of all, I want to thank both speakers for very good information. First, I want to have the chance to ask Harry a question. You mentioned the 3 L's, and you mentioned them as ways to, well, integrate or come into society and be a part of society, unless I'm mistaken. You also mentioned, let me see my notes here, you also mentioned the notion of informal citizenship and how to go and approach those issues as well. Now, my question leads to the fact that I would challenge that approach by saying now, for instance, the Jews in Germany during the 30s, they indeed approached and fulfilled these 3 L's and the informal citizenship. Nevertheless, yeah, you know the history of the Jews in Germany. So my statement there is that these 3 L's are not sufficient. Could you answer that approach or that statement? And then, just quickly, I will also ask Eva about those preconditions that you mentioned. You mentioned that in order to have a society that's democratic, you should have equality, social rights, or social capital, and a public sphere that helps these social capital to develop. Now, my question is, what's your take on elections? Do you think that elections should be done prior to these preconditions, or do you think one should wait until after? And you also mentioned about the problem in Eastern Europe. I would like to ask you there, because you didn't mention the external elite, and what do you think that the external global elite, their role is in the lack of success in Eastern Germany? Oh, sorry, in Eastern Europe.
I think my question is related with 3 L's. I mean, with regard to the last one, is loyalty and expectation that immigrants should contribute to society here. I think it's a bit naive, the way I found, because I mean, it's like sort of they didn't come here because they love here, Europe, because there are some situations where they come here. I think unless it's like a forced marriage, you're forced to marriage. You love someone, your country, but you're forced to marry someone. But the other couple is not treating you well, and you expect that this marriage will go on, or to contribute that marriage. I think in that sense, I mean, loyalty and contribution is a bit naive in a sense. And the other one, I think, although despite of the problems here, Muslim community here in Europe, they are much more advanced in many levels. For example, the concept of ummah and integration, or sort of talking to other Muslims and sort of ummah is much more advanced. For example, even European Muslim network, we can see sort of, there are more interaction in terms of Muslims here, in terms of ummah, in terms of national understanding, sort of positive nationalism. I think it's much more advanced. So I want to hear your perspective on that.
To carry on with that, thanks for the enlightening talk. Just a quick question in reference to your notion of empowerment, where people become the subject of their own history. I found that very, very interesting. But I don't want to sort of shift the focus here. But if you look at sort of the Arab Spring, where in fact the people and the revolutions led by the group, they in fact did that. How do you see that sort of evolving into like what do you envision is going to happen next? Now they have become the subject of their own history, and they're beginning to sort of define that. What do you think is going to happen as they begin this process?
Anyway, I agree with you for what you said about that you felt that this phenomenon was only for Europe, and you discovered it's not only Europe, it's Canada and States of America and Canada even, which wasn't like this before. But don't you think this is, the matter is not only against Muslims in West countries, but you can find it vice versa in Islamic countries or Arabic countries like Egypt, for example. against somebody else from the Muslims, against Copts, against Christians. Don't you feel it's not only a matter of native, we are the native, we are the English people, Irish, Swedish, whatever, but we are the majority against the minority on the basis of religious. You are talking here about something, it's a combination, what you are talking about, and I agree with you, the way they are feeling towards Muslims. Of course, everybody of us who are with human rights is against this. To feel that you are typical different race and typical different maybe religion, but it is the same. You can find it in vice versa. How can you accept this? Do you accept the vice versa picture, or you are not accepting it? So because it's not, it is the same. If you are talking about race or native, and you are talking about minority and majority.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question, Anja. The last one. I'm sorry.
Yes, I have two questions, one to Lee and one to Tai. The first to Lee, you talked about the notion of reflective democracy, and I just want to, if you could expand 1 second about the reflectiveness of this reflective democracy. If it just means that democracy is widened and deepened, or if it has something to do with people's reflection on the position of the democracy itself. That was the first question. The one two was, you talked about the relation between the text and the reading of the text, so to speak, the law, the letter, and the narrative around the letter. And then my question to you was, what implications does this have on your view, on your position in relation to the importance or significance of a written constitution at all? What could be written into a constitution that makes it more, let's say, clear-cut and clearly clear in interpretation? Do you see my point? Because one would perhaps suspect that we don't need any written constitution because we can always have a fight over the wording of it and the interpretation of it.
Well, I can be quicker because I have a few questions. So I will start with the question from down there. I don't think that the kind of factors that sustain this kind of citizenship that I talked about, that is equality, social capital, and the public sphere, has to come, should be there firstly. I mean, that it's this kind of sequence. I think these factors are very, let's say, they are very demanding in themselves. They have to be like developed and elaborated parallelly. And I mean, I think that elections, of course, and I didn't mention that because I think elections are, of course, a very crucial point here in democracy and democratic practices. I mean, without elections, there's basically not very much democracy to talk about at all. Although I think the question about, let's say, income inequality might be interesting here, because if we have very big gaps and introduce elections, there might be a kind of formative period which is not very sustaining of some kind of political party structure that actually caters to the less well-off, for example. So I think the question is interesting, really, but I didn't think about it in that way, that something should come first and then, or I thought about it more as a kind of parallel processes. Eastern Europe and external elites. No, I don't think that external elites have been detrimental to Eastern Europe. I think that, for example, the European Union has been very positive for parts of Central Europe, at least, and the Baltic states. I mean, without that, I think we would see an even more pessimistic picture developing here. So there might be some other external elites that you think about that I don't know of, but if we just talk about the EU, which has been a very strong and important force in this part of the world, I think that that's played a crucial positive role mostly. Reflective citizenship, what I was thinking of is more of a kind of, let's say, a critical reflexivity in the sense that you could also reflect, have a more kind of intellectual take on your position as a citizen on democracy. I mean, that you can assess judgment, assess information, that you have some kind of elaborated judgment, which I think we often want to see developed in democracies, but that is often not sustained by other factors. So that's what I still haven't thought through all these kind of concepts, but I think reflective here is more in that sense. It's sort of introducing a kind of intellectual component also into citizenship. Thank you.
Yes. The first question about the 3 L's of integration. No, it's not at all about integration. I'm not using the concept of integration. I think it's a loaded term. It's a term of the past. I'm talking about post-integration discourse, which has much more to do with contribution. And I'm repeating that the success of integration is to stop talking about integration, which is the starting point of everything. Now, having said the 3 L's are important in the way we are dealing with the environment to feel at home. Does it mean that it's enough not to be rejected, that you are not going, because you are getting the means of your own empowerment, you are not going to face racism? Of course not. You are going to face racism. You are going to deal with a society where the social capital, civil society to be involved. This is the way you are going to deal with it. So I'm not talking here about the necessary means to be accepted. The necessary means to be yourself and to feel good, the well-being, to refuse alienation, to refuse to be defined by someone from outside and not from you. Your own way of dealing with your own self and your own perception of who you are, where you are. With the 3 L's, you are able to have multiple identities, and it's not a problem. If it's a problem for you, it's not for me. And to be able to be equipped, intellectual capital, to say, I'm not going to respond to your question. You know, recently I was with Muslim communities saying, you know, you have to have exactly the intellectual positioning in some imposed intellectual debate, a kind of intellectual dictatorship. That people are oppressing you is always the same question. You should intellectually be able to say what was said in Egypt and in Tunisia to the intellectual, the political dictator, Dégage. You remember this word? Dégage. I don't want to talk about this. Dégage. Leave the place free for us to say what we have to do. It's a very important point. It's a very important point. I'm not talking about integration at all. This was not my point. I'm talking about the principles, the conditions to get the citizenship we are talking about from where you are. And now, once again, it doesn't mean that we are not going to face racism. I would say exactly the opposite. The more someone who is perceived as coming from outside is getting the means from within, the more he can be or she could be understood as dangerous. Many people are asking, I'm putting this in the book, by the way, why I'm a controversial intellectual in Europe. You know why? I'm too European. I'm too much a European. I'm not even the other. I'm not enough the other. So when you are entering and say, I'm like you, it's dangerous. So it might be that it's the other way around. About, it might be simplistic, loyalty and contribution, and forced marriages, the way you can see it and say, first, I think that there are things that we have to tackle. It's not easy. I'm not saying to anyone, for example, coming from a very specific history, that you have to love this country. Like this, it's not coming out, you have to. I don't have to. But now we have to assess the situation, is really to reassess who you are, where you are.